you for joining us this morning. And let me introduce Dr. Merlin Tuttle. Dr. Merlin Tuttle is an American ecologist, conservationist, writer, and wildlife photographer who has specialized in bat ecology, behavior, and conservation. He is credited with protecting the Austin Congress Avenue Bridge bat colony from extermination, and Dr. Tuttle is currently active as founder and executive director of Merlin Tuttle's Bat Conservation in Austin, Texas. And Teresa Nicta will share with you guys a link that you can follow if you are not a member of Merlin Tuttle's Bat Conservation yet. You can become a member through the link that Teresa will be sharing with you all. Dr. Tuttle is known for his lifetime of work in bat research and preservation. His efforts in the establishment of the National Park of American Samoa are well known. His research on great bat population ecology, migration, and the frog-eating bats. And by the way, the bats that you're seeing in this picture are not the frog-eating bats, and Merlin will describe these bats in this picture during his presentation. Dr. Tuttle's photography of bats has been featured in numerous National Geographic Society publications, including 100 Best Pictures in 100 Years of Adventure and Discovery. In 2002, the United States Postal Service released a commemorative stamp series featuring Tuttle's photography. In 2019, Tuttle served as science editor and photographer for the Smithsonian books publication, Bats, an Illustrated Guide to All Species. He has received accolades for his research and conservation work, including the Garrett S. Miller Jr. Award, and has been honored by the Texas State House of Representatives. In 2015, Dr. Tuttle published his memoir, The Secret Life of Bats, My Adventures with the World's Most Misunderstood Mammals. And one lucky attendee, randomly selected, will receive a signed copy of this book, and another lucky attendee will receive a bat house. So we welcome Dr. Merlin Tuttle, and we will let him start his presentation soon. Oh, by the way, give me 1 second. There's something that I really want to show you. I don't know why I didn't do it. Well, let's see if I can. Can you see the big screen? I'm just really proud to know Dr. Merlin Tuttle for the last 5 years, and this photograph was taken during the Texas Pollinator Powwow in Nacogdoches about 3 years ago. We see Dr. Pablo Jaramillo, Ellen Sharp, who are monarch conservationists and work really hard in Mexico protecting monarchs. Of course, Dr. Merlin Tuttle and the executive director of the Texas Pollinator Powwow, Karen McLaughlin, and myself, Rebecca Quiñones, in the photo. And I just have to say that I'm very honored and proud to know Dr. Merlin Tuttle.
Good morning. I'm delighted to have this opportunity. We'll get set here in just a second, hopefully. I'm very much looking forward to introducing some of the world's most important but often neglected pollinators. It may come as a big surprise, but bats are actually superstars in the world of pollination, and they're absolutely full of amazing surprises. And we'll get to those surprises as soon as we can stabilize my PowerPoint presentation. Here we go. Right here in Texas, the pallid bat is famous for its ability to survive even the deadliest stings of scorpions and centipedes upon which it feeds. But until very recently, no one had any idea, not in our wildest imagination would we have thought that this bat was also a key pollinator for certain plants. And I'll introduce that a little later. But right now, we'll take a look at the better known bat pollinators of Texas, the greater long-nosed bats that come to Southwest Texas every summer to pollinate our agave plants. And this is a Mexican long-tongued bat, also a species that comes into Texas to pollinate our agaves. It came as a surprise even to me to discover years ago that there are some 300 species of agaves, probably more than that described by now, most of which rely on bats as their primary pollinators. In fact, some of them are very economically important. These bats are pollinating the agave from which all tequila and much of the mezcal is produced. These are worth more than $1 billion a year to the Mexican economy and could be lost without these bats to pollinate their flowers. If we go a little west of here to the Sonoran Desert, we find that bats are absolutely key to the whole ecosystem's health and continuance. These giant cacti, the famous saguaro and the organ pipe, rely on bats as their primary pollinators. They're just a couple of the dozens of species of columnar cacti between southwestern US and Chile that are relying primarily on bats for pollination. The saguaro is a little bit unique because it's found farther north than the other large columnar cacti, and it has to hedge its bets because the bat pollinators aren't as reliable when you get up into the United States in the northern end of their range. It was long thought, though, that this cactus was predominantly pollinated by white-winged doves. But we always had this question, why, if it's primarily pollinated by doves, does it open its flowers at midnight and produce most of its nectar and pollen at night? Well, it turns out that the doves do provide some pollination, but they're not its most effective pollinators by any means, and that's why it opens and produces most of its nectar at night. But it does keep its flowers open during the day, unusual for these columnar cacti that rely on bats. A lot of people see huge numbers of bees at these flowers in the daytime and think that bees are their pollinators. Now, I wouldn't deny that bees are extremely important pollinators for many, many kinds of flowers, but when they visit saguaro cactus flowers, they're actually be viewed more as detrimental thieves, because you see this flower produces so much pollen and nectar that a bee only needs to visit one flower to get all it can carry. And so it doesn't really go from flower to flower as needed for pollination. And worse yet, as the day progresses, the numbers of bees build up at the remaining saguaro flowers that are still open, and they chase away the birds like the white-winged doves that actually do accomplish some pollination. So pollinators aren't always what we think they are. They can be very different in different situations. Here's the real pollinator of saguaro cactus. And as you can see, the lesser long-nosed bat can carry a lot of pollen on its fur. In fact, these guys, unlike the birds and bees, because they have to concentrate in large numbers into very few caves, they travel long distances at night, and this bat can travel as much as 60 miles between plants that it's visiting in a single night. This one is obviously doing a great job of pollinating the organ pipe cactus. Organ pipe and cardon, which I'll show you in a moment, are heavily reliant on bats. They put all their eggs in one basket, proverbially, and they're open only at night, not trying to court options by day. This is a cardone cactus. The first time I went to Mexico, to northern Mexico, to photograph bats pollinating organ pipe and saguaro flowers, this cactus, the cardone, was thought to be moth pollinated. People would see these large sphinx moths visiting the flowers as they just began to open in the evening. This flower is not fully open yet, it's just beginning to open. And people saw large numbers of moths going to them, and so they assumed that the moths were actually the pollinators. But as you can see in this picture, these sphinx moths have very long proboscis, similar to a tongue, and they can reach deep into the flower and steal nectar without ever touching the reproductive organs. They're probably essential pollinators for other plants, but when they visit the cardone, they're basically serving as thieves. When a bat comes, in order to get a good drink, he has to really come in excellent contact with the reproductive organs, as you see here. This cactus gets to be up to 50 feet tall, and it's very dependent upon bats. But now this bat may look a little different than those long-nosed bats that were pollinating the other cacti. This is a pallid bat, the one I mentioned earlier that feeds on scorpions and centipedes. And it obviously can carry a lot of pollen. And it's an important pollinator, not just for this cactus, but for many others. This cactus is also reliant, as are saguaro and organ pipe, on bats to carry their seeds to new locations. Again, they're by far the most effective long-distance seed dispersers. This is the largest cactus in the world. It gets over 50 feet tall, and it's an absolutely key plant, as are saguaro and organ pipe, for the survival of a wide variety of other animals. This Gila woodpecker is nesting in a cardone cactus and is feeding its chicks the fruit of an also bat-dependent organ pipe cactus. And these Harris's hawks wouldn't have a good place to safely nest were it not for the huge cardone cactus. We go a little bit further south into the neotropical rainforest, we find that bats, if that's possible, are even more important. In the Latin American rainforests of the Americas, bats constitute more than half of all mammal species. And in some places, their sheer body weight probably exceeds that of all other mammals combined. They're very important, not just as pollinators, but also as controllers of insect populations, keeping them from getting out of check, dispersing seeds to bring about reforestation. But let's now look at their pollination role. This is Ralph Simon, a colleague of mine who specializes in bat pollinated plants. And he's up in the canopy looking at tank plants. Here we have two species of tank plants that are bat pollinated in Costa Rica. There are more than 22 species of these plants already known to rely on bats for pollination. And they're key plants in the rainforest canopy because they get their name tank plants because they capture and hold large amounts of water. And they serve as virtual drinking fountains for everything from monkeys and toucans to parrots and frogs. Now I want to introduce you to something that I find really, really fascinating. This is a bat visiting a tank plant flower, but what I find fascinating here is where the flower is placing its pollen. You see, flowers don't want to mix their pollen. Mixing their pollen results in infertile offspring, kind of like breeding a horse and a donkey, and you get a mule that is infertile. So these plants, although they may all be blooming at the same time, there may be a dozen or more species blooming simultaneously. They don't want to mix their pollen among species. So this one is putting it on the bat's forehead. This one is putting it on the bat's throat. This one has a long hand-like structure that enables it to slap the pollen between the bat's shoulders. This Caligallo palm is an understory plant in the rainforest. It produces flowers that are actually made to be eaten by the bats. And in eating these flowers, the bat gets pollen on its chin. And when it goes to the female inflorescence, it actually eats a fruit-like cap off the female flower, and while it's doing that, it deposits the pollen from its chin onto the female flower. Now, in case you thought you'd already seen all the places that a plant could put pollen on a bat, I've got a couple more surprises for you. This orchid tree puts its pollen on the bat's wings, has special long anthers to achieve that purpose. And these are sea beans. They're quite incredible. This plant is absolutely determined to be pollinated only by bats. It hangs its inflorescences, that's groups of flowers, on long, long stems. They're a meter or more long, called peduncles. And this prevents climbing animals from getting to the flowers. The flowers don't open for business until way after sundown, so that they don't risk much visitation from hummingbirds or insects. And they have additionally incredible sophistications that I'm about to display for you. Notice this little opening right here. We have when the flower is ready, okay, this flower has already been pollinated by a bat. This one is ready to be pollinated, and it raises a petal that sticks up like a flag to tell the bat it's ready. And right below it, there's a 2 millimeter wide slot that serves like a keyhole, and the bat has to get its tongue exactly in that keyhole in order to get a reward and pollinate the flower. There is no other animal that can use this echo reflector and be guided to that exact keyhole slot. Now notice as this bat is approaching, its nose leaf is aimed right into the reflector so that it's being guided just like pilots are guided at night when landing on in an airport. They're guided by the landing lights. Well, this flower is guiding the bat's echolocation so it can find this little keyhole. And the next shot here shows the tongue going into the keyhole. And this all happens in a tiny fraction of a second. Next, the flower forcefully fires pollen from spring-loaded anthers onto the bat's rump. And here the bat is just leaving with its rump covered in pollen. Now, just in case you think I must have some secret that makes this easy to get these pictures to document bat values, this sequence that you just saw took 10,000 pictures to get. It was one of the biggest challenges I ever attempted, fortunately funded by National Geographic so we could afford to stay and try for a long time. Now I want to introduce you to another equally amazing flower from Cuba. This, I call it an echo vine. It's a rare, widely spaced plant that grows in Cuban cloud forests and rainforests. And it grows in very dense vegetation. You see here how this inflorescence, this group of flowers, is surrounded by vegetation. You might see how this would be difficult to approach properly at night, given all these obstacles in the way. Well, for many years, for decades, it was assumed that this red flower must be hummingbird pollinated. We well know that red flowers are often the most attractive to hummingbirds, and there is this kind of myth out there that bat flowers are all white and large. As you'll see, that's not true. This is an emerald hummingbird. I took more than 400 pictures of these little guys visiting this flower, and never once did one of them in 400 and some pictures touch the reproductive organs of the flower. Again, the hummingbird is probably a very important pollinator at some other kind of plant, but when it's visiting this one, it's basically a thief. When the bats come at night, you see a very different result. You see here how the bat can't get its head in to get the nectar without becoming really coated with pollen on the back of its head and neck. So what was it that alerted bat biologists that this might be a bat pollinated instead of a hummingbird pollinated plant? Well, here's what they noticed. The first leaf of this vine over the inflorescence, the group of flowers, is turned upside down and aimed down to guide a bat's echolocation. Again, like the petal on the sea bean flower, it is a reflector. And notice all the other leaves on the same vine are turned around the opposite direction to pick up the sunlight for photosynthesis. These bats, if you put cotton in the way of the reflector or remove the reflector, the frequency of finding the flowers goes way, way down. So there's clear scientific documentation that these reflectors are in fact guiding bats into the flowers. Now, on my trip to Cuba, I decided to show just some of the incredible variation among flowers pollinated by bats. People who think bat flowers are all large, sturdy, and white might never even guess that a flower like this Search Me Heart flower in Cuba was bat pollinated. And then at the other extreme, who would have dreamed that the shaving brush flower was bat pollinated? It is at least white and large. And I can tell you that this tree sheds all of its leaves just before flowering so that the bats can see these flowers from a longer distance and find them. And for anyone who thought bats were blind, I can assure you they have very good eyes in addition to their echolocation. And the bats that visit these flowers often see them at a distance and approach closely before they use their echolocation. This Cuban flower bat is, again, doing a very good job of pollinating a blue maho tree. The blue maho is a very important tree in Cuba. It's used as an ornamental in people's yards, and its timber is harvested for beautiful wood paneling. I hate to tell you what happens to bats like this. They form colonies of 1 million or more in caves, and they're incredibly vulnerable. When people fear bats, it's very easy for even one human to go out and burn or close a cave like this and kill all the bats inside. In fact, while I was photographing bats in Cuba, I wanted to go to one of these big flower bat caves and photograph the bats coming out in the evening. When I got there, I found that the cave had just been sealed shut. All the bats, uncounted thousands, had died trapped inside because somebody had been told that they might someday cause disease, even though it had never happened. So before I make it sound like Cubans or people in other countries are less bright than we are because they do these terrible things, I might point out that they're getting their fear from us, from ridiculous headline stories like this. Time magazine, our bats are the #1 carriers of disease. National Public Radio, bats are arguably among the most dangerous animals in the world. Wall Street Journal, Where will the next pandemic come from? Likely from bats. Anybody that believed these stories wouldn't want bats around. They're presented lately as almost the equivalent of flying rattlesnakes. We might value rattlesnakes in their rodent control, but nobody would want them near their home, much less ones that could enter your home. But the truth is that none of these diseases that are frequently ascribed to bats have ever been actually found in a bat. The risk from bats is completely speculative, and it's speculated by individuals who financially benefit from very large grants or media headlines that sell readership. We have the bottom line test of whether bats are dangerous disease carriers here in Austin, where I live. When I first came to Austin, these bats were about to be exterminated. People were signing petitions to have them eliminated. And we convinced the city that these bats were actually harmless. And today, decades later, we have the proof in that we haven't had a single person attacked. Not a single person has contracted a disease from one of these bats, even though they were claimed to be mostly rabid when they first arrived. All they do is attract millions of tourist dollars each summer, control tons of insect crop pests every night, and harm no one. We now know from personal experience that bats are safe and invaluable neighbors. Let's get back now to what they do in pollination. This old man's beard cactus is found only in a single valley in the whole world. It lives in Ecuador, and it has a really novel approach to being pollinated by bats. This furry substance you see produced along one side of each spike of the cactus actually absorbs echolocation sound. So as this bat approaches its flower, and the flowers all bloom from within the furry substance on one side, the flower reflects the echoes to the bat to guide it in, but the furry substance around the flower absorbs any distracting echoes so that they don't confuse the bat, and the bat has a much sharper image of the flower it's approaching. These flowers too are very dependent on bats. They don't open until near midnight, and we found the hard way when photographing them, and if we so much as shone a headlight on one to focus the camera, if we shined it for more than a few split seconds, the flower would start to close, thinking that the morning was coming and it didn't want to be open in daylight. Now I've got a truly incredible story, also from Ecuador. These are puya plants. These plants grow in the paramo of the Andes, high up where it's too cold for bats to live and rear young. But this plant is bat pollinated. Now, how can that be? Well, the bats that visit it live down in warm tropical and subtropical valleys. And in the evening, they ride thermals, just like we ride an escalator in a shopping mall. Amazingly, this plant has to live for roughly 100 years before it first flowers. It flowers for a single season and then dies. So its pollination must be incredibly important. Bats are among its most important pollinators. Now let's take a look at way far out in the Pacific how bats pollinate important plants. This flying fox, an endangered Mariana fruit bat, is pollinating a Freycinetia liana vine in Guam. This plant produces a complete set of 18 amino acid proteins, apparently as a special inducement to get the bat to come to its flowers. The fleshy bracts are eaten like we'd eat cantaloupe, and in doing that, the bat also gets pollen, which meets its protein needs. Long before modernization on these islands, the fibers from this plant's vines were heavily used by people to make fish traps and other things. Another important island plant is the kapok tree, which is actually found worldwide in tropical forests. And any of you who survived the Pacific Front in World War II may owe your lives to the kapok field life preservers. The kapok comes from this kapok tree. It produces a cottony-like substance around its seeds, just like our cotton plants. In Australia, we have key timber trees, many of them that are bat pollinated. This is a black bean tree being pollinated by a critically endangered spectacled flying fox. This tree is very much sought after for its beautiful veneer wood. And this gray-headed flying fox is pollinating a eucalypt tree. There are many species in the eucalyptus family, most of which rely on bats as their primary pollinators. Sadly, in much of Australia, people refer to these bats as black devils and hate them, completely misunderstanding their importance. They love koala bears and would practically lay down their lives to protect koala bears, and yet the koalas could die out without these bats to pollinate the flowers of their favorite food trees. The first German botanist who discovered flying foxes with 3 and 4 foot wingspans pollinating these tiny fragile eucalyptus flowers was terribly ridiculed when he went home and claimed that these giant bats were pollinating these tiny fragile flowers. Nobody believed him. But today we know that in fact flying foxes are excellent pollinators of eucalypt type flowers. They get covered all across their wings and bodies when they land to sip nectar from individual flowers. Now, if we go all the way around to East Africa, we find that one of the world's most famous trees, the baobab, is also highly dependent upon bat pollination. When I first went to Kenya to photograph bats, I was told that baobabs were pollinated by bush babies. Well, that didn't make any sense because these little primates would have to hop across the ground for hundreds of yards, sometimes for miles, to get between these giant trees, and that would make them very vulnerable to predators. Actually, it turns out that a bush baby can get all the food it needs in a single night from a single baobab tree. It doesn't need to pollinate to go between trees. But what is really happening is that whole flocks of fruit and nectar eating bats will approach these trees soon after their flowers open, and their flowers don't open until they start to open right after sundown. And if you were God and an engineer, you couldn't devise a better system for getting pollinated than this baobab has. Between each of its flower petals is a little nectary full of nectar, and the bat, to get its full portion of nectar from a flower, has to rotate all the way around, sticking its tongue in each nectary. While doing that, it is doing an excellent job of contacting the anthers and stigma with its body and wings, achieving outstanding pollination. And this tree isn't just of great ecological importance, it's of such ecological importance it's been often referred to as the African tree of life. It's also of great economic value. The fruits from baobab trees sell for more than $1 billion annually. Now let's head to Southeast Asia and have a look at what bats do there. This bat is pollinating a mangrove tree. We don't usually think too much about mangroves. we might even view them as almost a weed, but in fact, they're critically, ecologically, and economically important. Mangrove forests along ocean island edges and river margins where they flow into the ocean are key breeding grounds for all kinds of sea creatures that are primary food for us humans. They're also huge stabilizers for islands that help build islands and protect them from being destroyed during typhoons. And it's hard to think of anything more economically important by way of pollinators in Southeast Asia than the durian. The durian fruit sells for billions of dollars annually, and yet you can't produce a single fruit, even in an orchard, without bats to pollinate the flowers. Unfortunately, when bats do this, soon after a bat visits a durian flower, the flower drops its petals to the ground. It's no longer essential petals and anthers. And durian growers, wherever I have visited, have been under the misimpression that the bats were destroying the flowers and harming their durian crop. And so very often they actually put up big nets and do their best to kill as many bats as possible. And to the extent that they succeed, they're seriously threatening their own crops, but they don't know that until someone comes and explains it. It's amazing what huge difference we can make with just a little bit of education on behalf of bats. The differences between perception and reality are almost 180 degrees apart oftentimes. And for another example from Southeast Asia, all modern commercial bananas originated from ancestors that lived in Southeast Asia in the wild. And again, these are highly dependent upon bats for pollination. If you just stop and think about it, about 70% of all the world's tropical fruits that we so enjoy come from plants that in the wild require bats as their primary pollinators or seed dispersers. The world would be very different without pollinating bats. And yet, the sad truth is that these bats are disappearing at alarming rates. This colony in a Thai cave, I took this picture some 40 years ago. It shows roughly 100,000 cave nectar feeding bats all in one cave site. I went back last year and only less than 1,000 remained where there had been 100,000 40 years ago. This should be very alarming, and yet these bats are disappearing. Their activities only occur at night, aren't seen. We only notice them if they're doing something we don't like. And so their conservation is often terribly neglected. This is a cave nectar bat, one of the most important pollinators of Southeast Asia. Now that I've shown just how important these little guys are, I want to again point out that although they have declined alarmingly in recent decades, they are under even greater threat today as they're threatened with misperceptions, claims that these bats can literally just fly over you and drop deadly diseases on you. Nobody believing those kinds of speculation would want these bats to be surviving anywhere near them. And yet these little guys are absolutely, there's not a single proven case of them transmitting a disease to a human. They are absolutely essential to our well-being. And that's why I urgently invite each of you to join me today in making every possible effort to ensure a future for these long misunderstood but vitally important, even delightfully likable masters of our night skies. Thank you. I'm ready to answer questions now. And I point out that we do have a lot of resources on my website if you're interested in helping spread the truth about bats and who in fact have not been documented to spread COVID, even though it's been speculated many times. If you're interested in helping understand bats' values versus risk and perspective, you can find all kinds of neat resources on our website. These are just a few.
Thank you so much, Merlin. That was a beautiful presentation, and it's so important for us to understand the role of bats in our ecosystems and especially the relevance being pollinators. And we know that pollinators are in peril lately. So thank you for making us aware of this. And I think we're going to start with some questions. Please, folks, remember to drop your questions in the Q&A chat box. Teresa, are we ready? Can I just go to the open questions for Merlin?
Yeah, go ahead to the open questions.
Okay,
I'm browsing through, but you get started.
Great. So we have the first question from Michael Strait. What would be the impact on malaria without bats?
We don't know what the impact on malaria without bats would be because nobody's ever studied their impact to begin with. But we do know that there was a study done a few years ago at the University of Michigan when a bat biologist and an entomologist teamed up to test and see if bats really made a difference in mosquito populations. And they found that bats did make a very significant difference and speculated that they might be very important in reducing malaria and other diseases. Unfortunately, we have so many people studying, trying to find ways to speculate bats being dangerous, that we're really neglecting looking at why they might be essential. Bats may, in fact, a study in Wisconsin just 2 years ago showed that the most abundant bats that use bat houses there are feeding on at least 15 species of mosquitoes, several of which are important carriers of West Nile virus. Bats are very possibly doing all kinds of things to prevent disease that are going unrecognized because it seems to be more lucrative to scare people about how they could spread disease.
Merlin, there's several questions. I'm going to kind of go rapid fire for a second. Just quick answers about pictures that you had. One was, are the old man's beard cactus all on one side? Oh, are the old man beards on one side of all the cacti, all facing the south?
I never thought to look to see. I don't think so. But it's an interesting question. It's kind of like I get asked if the bats coming out of the cave swirl left on one side of the equator and right on the other. Nobody's ever thought to look.
Okay, does eucalyptus produce fruits that bats eat?
Excuse me, repeat
that. Does eucalyptus produce fruit that bats eat?
No.
Okay. On the Okinawan flying foxes, Linda says she saw some. Do you know what species those were? I think you mentioned.
The ones I mentioned were Tropus marianus, the Marianus fruit bat. They're endangered. In fact, nearly extinct on the island of Guam.
Do you have pictures of those on the website?
Yes.
Cool.
I have pictures of the last remaining colony.
Wow. I linked that earlier, but if you go to our website, you can find the photo gallery. Janelle says, thank you, Merlin. You are the best. Brittany says, first of all, thank you for that wonderful presentation. There's a few questions about what can people do at home? What's the best way that people can, the average citizen, how can we contribute to bat conservation? What can we do at home? So I'll briefly summarize to say, tell people the truth about bats, because fear is the number one thing stopping from people from supporting bats and wanting to understand them. Getting a bat house is great. What do you think, Merlin?
Well, putting up a bat house makes an interesting statement. It says, hey, I practice what I preach. I tell you that bats aren't dangerous. If I thought they were, I wouldn't invite them to my yard. That it is true that we can make a huge difference just by spreading the word about bats, that for any human who simply doesn't pick up and handle a sick bat, the odds of contracting any disease from a bat are very close to zero. And yet by welcoming them into our neighborhoods, we can benefit tremendously. Fewer pests in our yards, fewer mosquitoes, all kinds of benefits. We hear a lot lately where people are saying, well, it's not the bat's fault that they carry Ebola and all these other diseases. Well, the truth is that it's never been demonstrated that they do carry all these diseases. There's no evidence actually that bats carry any more dangerous diseases than any other animal. And what those who want to profit from fear of bats don't tell us is how easy it is to avoid any risk of getting any disease from a bat. Just don't handle them. Sit back and relax, enjoy the benefits we have from sharing our neighborhoods with them.
So by having a bat house, oh, go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, I was just going to comment that it's the same with any other wildlife species. Just let them be, don't handle them. There's no need to remove them from their natural habitat, and just help them protecting and supporting their ecosystem, their native habitat, right?
Yeah, we're very lucky that bats, in fact, are some bats are among the most adaptable animals on the planet when it comes to learning to share even our altered habitats and still make a big difference for us. And we should welcome that, take advantage of it whenever we can, and get over our groundless fear.
So by having a bat house, Merlin, do you say like the larger impact of having a bat house isn't necessarily that you're giving them somewhere to live, but it's more that you're sending a message that bats are not to be feared?
Well, bat houses can provide important habitat. There's no question about that. Some Americans have literally attracted thousands of bats by putting up bat houses. In fact, the University of Florida in Gainesville has what we call bat barns. I designed the first of their bat barns. They've now attracted close to 500,000 bats, and they become a major attraction. People coming from all around, just like they do here in Austin, to watch the bats come out at night. You can make a big difference in providing places for bats to live, but I would say that one of the biggest things you can do is just by putting up a bat house and attracting bats, you're making a statement that you believe what you say about bats being safe and valuable.
And following that, remember, we will be giving away a bat house certified by Merlin Tuttle's Bat Conservation, plus one copy of his book. And I guess we will do that very soon, just to be respectful of everyone's time. However, Merlin has told us that he will be happy to stay here and answer all the questions you guys have. So if you want to grab more coffee and sit with us and have a great conversation with Merlin, we will be here. So I don't know when Shell will be ready to let us know who are the two lucky ones. And the other thing that I want to acknowledge is that we have attendees from all over the world, which is amazing. That indicates how well known Dr. Merlin Tuttle is around the world. We have people from Europe and in Mexico, in Canada, so it's just great. So we welcome you guys, and thank you for making the time, especially that we have a time difference, especially with Europe. So Shell, let us know when you're ready to let us know.
While Shell gets that ready in the last few minutes, I'm going to ask these couple pollinated questions. There's lots of questions about this. Okay, one said, are all night blooming plants bat pollinated?
No. I hope I didn't mislead anybody in thinking that moths aren't important pollinators. Although they may steal nectar from cardone cactus, they're also very important pollinators of certain other, even their cactus plants that are importantly pollinated by moths.
Do bats pollinate mangroves in Florida?
No, they don't. Our mangroves are apparently somewhat distantly related to the Asian mangroves. I'm not an expert in botany. I have never looked into the exact differences. I just know that our mangroves aren't bat pollinated, whereas the ones in Southeast Asia are.
So just to be clear, maybe you can just say a statement like, where do the United States pollinators live? Merlin's saying are because we're located in Austin, Texas, but we have people from everywhere. So in the United States, they're only
we only have bat pollinators in the United States along the southern borders of Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona.
Okay.
They migrate north each summer to visit cacti and agaves, and there are plants right here in Texas that have yet to be discovered that are probably bat pollinated. We caught a pallid bat a year or so ago in the Big Bend area that had lots of pollen on it way early in the spring at a time when none of the plants that we know are bat pollinated are flowering. So there must be one out there that we as yet haven't discovered. And we look forward to figuring out which one that is.
I'm ready.
I was ready.
So the winner of the Bat House is Vicki Blackman. Vicki, are you here? She can't talk, so we're just gonna have to cheering and happy. And the winner of the book is Addison Shack. I will email both of you people and ask for your actual mailing addresses and send you your goodies. Or, well, Teresa will send the book.
Yeah, thank you all for being here.
Yeah, do you want to keep going with the question, Teresa?
Yeah, we'll just keep going. So it's 11:59, so if anyone has to go, just thank you so much for being here, and we really appreciate your interest and support. And I'll just share this membership link one last time so you can grab it before you go. But yeah,
I want to thank everybody who's been a participant this morning. It's going to take a lot of our combined efforts to counter what's going on lately and scaring people about bat disease, when in fact we should be talking about what bats do for us rather than what they might do but never have done against us.
Right.
Yeah, so you can join. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead, Teresa.
I was just going to say you can join. There's a free membership if you're, the sustaining memberships are super, super helpful to us. But if you just want to sign up for free to get our newsletters, that is also available. So that's all in the link that I just shared a second ago.
Thank you. And I just wanted to thank everyone again for being here. We are very honored to host Dr. Merlin Tuttle. And I will be sending you guys a survey so you can let us know how we're doing, how we can improve these webinar series, what's popping in Texas, all about our native pollinators. And once more, thank you so much for joining us.